And here we are again. Can you believe it?
It's been a year.
2025. I know it has. And I don't know that as many things have changed as I thought they would. I don't know. Is that a good way to start this off? I was looking at, well, I go, okay. One thing that has changed is how easily I can just ask something like Perplexity. I give it the URL and say, hey, what did
Yeah.
we talk about last year? That works pretty well. That wouldn't have worked last year. It can actually
I think,
just pull the transcript and go like,
yeah.
and it actually says like by name, like here's what I talked about. Here's what you talked about. So I guess that's one thing that has changed.
And I think the funny thing is that rag? I mean, is that like, and it's still a debatable topic that I still see to this day of people arguing, is rag just vector, like vector search? And so that, I mean, that might be an interesting place. Remember the whole rag is dead. And like, I think that was that this year. I mean, everybody kind of had the
Well,
rag is dead conversation. And
it was last year. It was this
yeah,
year.
so it's interesting that it never goes away. So.
Wait, so do you think I have never really okay, that's interesting. I haven't really thought about it that way. I guess maybe because we're in so much in the graph world. But do some people think RAG is just using semantic similarity for vector
Oh yeah,
embeddings?
that's where a lot of these big kind of Twitter threads come out, where somebody is like religious about rag means vector. Like, and if you're not using vector search, it's not rag. And other people like me are more pragmatic, and I think you are probably as well. Is like you're
Well, I'm
retrieving
a lot
data.
of things.
Yeah,
Pragmatic only some of the
yeah,
times.
and it's more of like, well, you're retrieving it like it could be a file load, it could be a grep, it could be a whatever. To me, that's retrieval, and it doesn't have, and vector is just one of many options. But there's other people that are like super adamant that like, oh, that's not rag. Like if it's not like it's not vector flavored.
Well, if it's not, well, okay, then what do they call? Okay, so then what do they call graph retrieval then?
I mean, that's the thing. Then, well, I think they have like a million different options: cache augmented rag or CAG, and there's graph rag, and there's like a million different I mean, acronyms for it. And I think some people like they want to put a name on it, and I'm more the fact of like, look, it's just all rag. Like, who cares? It's retrieval. I mean, let's move on.
I mean, that's kind of what I think too. Um, so let's think. Well, okay, what are some things we talked about last year? Now that we've gotten off to this interesting start, I think your big prediction was that 2025 would be the as a service year.
Yeah.
Now that we're at the end of 2025, how you feeling about that one?
I mean, honestly, it's at first I was like, yeah, that kind of happened, but then it hit me. Gemini file search, a lot of the cloud providers, Microsoft Foundry IQ, essentially all the cloud providers now have a basic RAG as a service option.
Mm.
Who's the other one? There's one other one that did. Upstash, I think, has one too. And so essentially, you could say that hit right on the head. It was the smaller providers, the ones that maybe had been the RAG as a service third party, maybe never blew up as much as I expected, but the cloud providers had a baseline of low hanging fruit. Like everybody was super hot on the Gemini file search, and I'm like, we've been doing this shit for a year. Like, I mean, 2 years. Like, this isn't that interesting.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
there's a lot of people that didn't even know it.
There's a lot of people. I don't want to. I don't want to name anybody specifically, but
Yeah,
we were having some conversations with a rather large neocloud not too long ago, and I started mentioning, how TrustGraph was kind of feature complete and on par with Vertex AI, and they went, "What's that?"
yeah.
And I'm just thinking, like, you're a neo cloud trying to sell into the AI space. Sir, surely you know what Vertex AI is, right? Like, no, no idea.
Yep,
Like
yep.
AWS Bedrock, all these things. Like, oh,
Wow.
like, really? And I think that comes back to something I think that you really, really, really nailed on the head. I actually quote you a lot on this now. So, is that you talked about how, because we talked a little bit about like autonomous vehicles and we talked
Yep,
about timelines.
yep,
And you said you tend to think when people make these predictions about what's going to happen, and it will happen,
Mhm.
it's probably it'll take a lot longer than
Yep.
people thought it would. And, I think that's kind of what 2025 for me was in a lot of ways is really seeing this play out. I thought the industry was going to move at the pace that we saw LLMs kind of evolving in 2023 and 2024. All of a sudden, like I said, I'm talking to a major neo cloud that has never even heard of Vertex AI.
Yeah.
I see that all the time. I talk to enterprises, and I could be it feels like I'm having a conversation back in 2023.
Yeah. It's I
That,
mean, it is surprising how I mean, there's a part of the world that is 5 years behind what I think it like, what I expect it to be,
mhm,
and
mhm.
we even saw that when we started this company in February, it'll be 5 years, and at the time, I mean,
You were really
everybody's like,
early
"Oh."
then.
Yeah, I mean, I can't it's hard to be I mean, think back that much, but we were selling in and people are like, "Well, we like, doesn't SharePoint do this? Like, I mean, why do we need this? Why do we need that?" And literally, I mean, now those same people might be adopting Microsoft Copilot or adopting, I mean, these
Are
other
they
things.
though?
Well, no, I mean, that's I think,
Are they? Well, did something come out just recently about that? Is like
yeah,
anybody
but
actually
like
using
nobody
Copilot? Yeah.
I think there's a ton of licenses because everybody gets it with Office 365 or whatever,
Oh
Microsoft
yeah.
365, but the usage is probably super low. But I think I mean, you're right on the autonomous. I mean, now what are we going into 2026 with what Waymo can do and what, I mean, all this could do? When I was at GM back in 2017, I think, um, they thought it was going to be like 3 years. And so now it'll be like 9 years, like 8 years or whatever.
Yeah.
And so I think it's almost double those timeframes to what they thought and were pitching. I mean, I think that last 10% is that classic thing where we're even seeing it in AI with even like coding agents and things like that. I mean, there's maybe in some areas there's not these massive steps we had from like
Hmm. Hmm.
GPT 3.5 to 4 and 4.0, but I mean, even just from Sonnet 4.5 to Opus 4.5, for me, from coding agent is a step change because it's the like
Hmm.
annoyance factor of how much does it do stupid stuff? And for me, it was like a major change of now it feels like I don't get annoyed at it at all. And it was just, I mean, a month before, 2 months before I was. And so you can look at those as they're doing something behind the scenes. I mean, the speed's not that different. The basic quality is not that different, but the richness of it or whatever there's some other adjective there is definitely changing.
Yeah, and I think that might be an interesting point to talk about. We did talk about maturity curves a little bit last
Yeah.
time, and I think that's something that I've been saying a lot lately. Is I think AI, or just maybe just call it language models,
Mhm.
have had one of the most unusual. Oh, I started thinking like, can I think of a technology that's had a similar style maturity curve? And I can't think of one because people have been researching these topics,
Yeah.
information theory, decision making, autonomous systems for almost 100 years.
Yeah.
Almost, it goes way back. And if you look back in even the 90s, I think actually I did talk about the DARPA Mutt conferences a little bit last time.
Yeah.
Do incredibly sophisticated workflows with at the time just natural language processing. So you had this technology kind of creeping along at very incremental.
Mhm.
I think we were probably at maybe 20, 30% maturity even
Mhm.
when companies like OpenAI were created, in
Yeah.
2015 and 2016. And then I think people are really underestimating the confluence of data availability and compute power because this is something that Google has talked about. Even with their TPUs over the last 3 to 4 years, they've seen not step changes in performance. We're talking like 1,000x,
Yeah.
and this is just like in the last 3 years. Like even they're going like, we can't believe it. This has
Yeah.
just been massive, massive compute gains, and all this theory So the theory, was pretty mature. People had all these ideas. It was really well worked out, but they just didn't have enough data and enough compute to really make it work. And all of a sudden, boom, it happened. We had enough data, we had enough compute, and this technology went from 20 to 30% maturity to I think we're well above 90 now for
Hmm.
language models. And it went just really in an instant. And
Yeah.
I can't think of a technology, maybe you can, where we went from such a low level maturity to such a high level maturity in such a short period of time.
Well,
And
it's interesting, but when you say that, it's making me think back to, like, I started my career more in 3D graphics. Like, I was like
okay.
really into 3D graphics in undergrad and then in grad school, and I went to a conference, like, I mean, went to SIGGRAPH like back in the day, and I remember like when ray tracing and like things like radiosity of like how you develop the light fields and things like that, and it was all like theoretical and it would take like hours or days to process one image. And now you look at the same effect of GPUs of what can you do now? I mean, you could do real time ray tracing on my son's computer upstairs. I mean, you could do, I mean, now this like Gaussian splatting for like 3D space rendering and stuff like that. And when I was at Microsoft, we were doing 3D virtual worlds in like 3D environments back, this is like a long time ago, but now that's just commonplace. I mean, you could do all of it. And there was things I was doing, like I had this one demo of a 3D a baseball ballpark that you could like navigate around in. And my idea was to see the game live. You could like be in the ballpark.
Mm,
And it's so funny because now on the MLB app for baseball, they literally have those kind of things where you can like navigate around and be as
mm,
part of this. And it's the ideas haven't changed that much, maybe, but the compute power,
hmm
the internet speeds, and so it's part of it is how much are we being creative, or are we just rehashing old ideas and now they're possible? And I think that's an area that, I mean, computer graphics especially seems like it's had a long tail and then a fast curve when the compute kind
hmm
of caught up.
Boy, you're leading me into something we did talk about before, and that's reinventing the wheel. And we
Yep.
had very strong opinions about reinventing the wheel. But I think I figured that one out a little bit. I think I did figure that one out a little bit. And it's not as malicious, well, not malicious, but it's not coming from the place that I thought it was. It actually was something that the co-founder of TrustGraph, Mark, said a few weeks back. He said that developers like to develop things, and I thought, that's a good point. That's an often overlooked sensibility in when enterprises make buy versus build. Is the developer team is always going to push to build it.
Hmm.
I mean, of course, you can say for crass reasons like
Yeah.
head count and trying to take credit for something and career building, but also just for the fact that developers want to develop.
So
And
let me ask you this. I mean, because
okay,
this ties in. We talk about Reddit sometimes, and this is one thing that super surprised me over the last year, that there's
okay,
still so many people you see on the RAG subreddit or anything related to that that are still trying to build from scratch. And like, and this is an area of that RAG as a service point that I made that does surprise me, that people aren't just, hey, I'm just going to use an API. Like the majority, it seems to me, of people are still like, hey, I want to still build this myself. And it's like they don't either and I guess it gets to your point of why is that? Like, is it just a learning experience for them? Is it they don't think the other things are good enough? But I mean, even just this morning on Twitter, somebody was like, "Hey, what's the current RAG stack that everybody wants to use?" And they mentioned like Weaviate and Llama Index and things like that, which were kind of like a hot 2024 companies in a lot of ways. And for me, I'm like, wow, people haven't really caught up to like maybe what I would consider state of the art in a lot of ways. So I don't know. It's a lot to chew on, but I wanted to interject
I got some bad news for you.
that.
We're the outliers. We were way early.
Yeah.
So and also I don't think we have to, I don't think I'm telling you anything. Also, I don't know if you know this. kind of old.
Yep.
But and I think that so we've seen some things. We've been around the block. We've been around a few blocks. Maybe been around the block a couple of times, and that's why we go like, yeah, not doing that again.
Yep.
And I think that perspective, and we're also very much, I'm here in the Silicon Valley machine. So I'm constantly immersed with, seeing what people are doing and hearing
Mhm.
the latest. And, that's one of the things that I learned because, I was back in, I lived for a long time in Atlanta, then in Boston and different places. I thought, I was on the cutting edge of technology. And then I come out here and go, this is a completely different mindset, completely different mindset. The things that we use as commonplace out here, most people just never even heard of. And like when they're
Yep.
starting to hear about something, people out here kind of already moved on from that
Yep.
tool or technology. Like that's not even the latest hotness anymore. Um, so I think there is a lot of that disconnecting what you see on social media
Mhm.
versus what people are actually using. And one of the things I also see is a lot of people that post on social media tend to be a lot younger than us, and
Mhm.
they're not as experienced, and they have not been exposed to nearly as much technology as we have. And also, I think we've worked for big enterprises. We've worked for really large scale systems, so we've seen software stacks that, take teams and teams and teams of people to manage. So we've kind of seen what happens when you have it all. And these younger next generation of developers just haven't gotten there yet. They haven't
Mhm.
worked in these kind of environments. And also a lot of companies are trying to place, you know, make everybody like this as tiniest cog possible so they can just plug and play developers. So a lot of times these developers don't even get the experience if they work at one of these
Yeah.
large
Yeah.
companies. And so I think there's a lot of that going on. And I was at the PyTorch conference, I guess what, a month or so ago. A lot of recent graduates there. Um, Most of them job hunting, and if you chatted with them, things aren't going well, which is not
Yeah.
kind of not reassuring. But I would have conversations and I would say, how much experience do you have deploying on cloud? Answer, I never deployed on cloud. Ooh. Like, what about, what's your experience with, containers? I don't expect you to be deploying massive Kubernetes clusters, but, some familiarization is like, never really worked with containers. And I'm thinking, like, I don't even know if you could work with us. This is
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
kind of fundamental stuff that you kind of just need to know. So that's a really, 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 really kind of roundabout way of saying that I think social media allows, anybody with an account to
Yeah.
post. And I think we have a lot of people have that are actually just genuinely not aware. They don't know what they don't know. They don't know that there are all these solutions out there. They don't know that this technology has its roots in information theory and research going back nearly a full century. They aren't aware of all of these open source projects out there. They don't know of where they came from. Like, I mean, for some real weird reason, I had multiple conversations in the last 2 weeks where MapReduce came up. And I'm like,
Well, yeah.
like, why are people talking about that all of a sudden? But that's out of that, came Hadoop and Spark. But you don't really hear people talk about Hadoop and Spark anymore.
Yeah.
But this is kind of stuff that scaled up an entire generation of tech companies. And I think there's an entire, and this isn't criticizing anybody, just to be clear, I think there's an entire generation that's never worked with
Yeah.
Hadoop or
Yeah.
never heard of MapReduce. They've just never been introduced to any of these things. And so they are unaware of it. And that's why they ask these questions. And this actually goes back to something else. A friend of mine, Tony Martin Vaghi from Netflix, he just is working on a book on cybersecurity risk quantification. And we also would have conversations about social media engagement on LinkedIn, which I know doesn't work at all for you, works for
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
Twitter doesn't work at all for me, but it does for you. So go figure. And I was talking to Tony about what kind of post worked best for him, and he said it's by far kind of like beginner post
Yeah.
for like understanding like topics at kind of the 101 level.
Yeah, yeah.
That's that's by far. And so if we start thinking about it, if that's the content that people want the most, so that's what gets upvoted the most. So knowing just how social media algorithms work, when somebody posts that kind of question, well, that's what gets promoted up. So that's what we all see. And when people ask the more niche or narrow or
Yeah.
focused technical question, we just may not happen to see it, or it may not even get,
Yeah.
nobody may see it.
It's a really interesting world. I mean, I think of once you and even randomly, like some of our best customers come and I'm like, "This is a perfect fit. Like, how did you find us?" And they're like, "Some random comment I made on Reddit like a year ago." And I'm like, "Really? Like that's how you found us?" Like it's just such a weird thing to be like, "Okay, I guess we'll keep doing that." I mean, but it's not like the old days of like normal sales. I mean, now it's just kind of you just got to get your kind of get everything out there and just hope that people touch it. I mean, touch your content.
Mm-hmm.
So it no, it's I mean we've seen it even on our new website that we've talked about like these glossary pages that we added,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it's interesting because that's that kind of 101 material that I mean
Mm-hmm.
ends up getting a lot of hits as well, and I mean I think it's I mean we're seeing kind of okay where I mean, even today with there was I mean we're I'm seeing a spike from Twitter just from one thread, and it's literally like if you can get on the right kind of reply guy kind of thread where you get included in the right conversation, I mean, you can get a lot of eyeballs really quickly, but it's completely random. I mean, of
Mm.
how to do that.
Yeah, and that's one thing we do share in common, though, is we've also found Reddit has been the best lead in for people defining trust graph when we post there. Although Reddit can be the R rag subreddit is an interesting
Yeah.
place.
Yep.
Um, I don't even know if we want to go down that rabbit hole of talking about that rabbit hole where it
I mean,
seems like it's okay for some people for the it seems yeah some people can promote all day long and have that yay thank you for that, whereas somebody else posts something like how dare you. I'm
it's
confused,
hilarious.
guys.
I got banned from r/MCP just because
Really?
I posted a um a waiting list like link of when we were launching Zine, it had a waiting
Uh-huh.
list, and I didn't read. My fault. I didn't read their community rules or whatever. It said no waiting list because I didn't expect that. But literally, like I even asked for like nicely. I was like, "I'm so sorry. Had no clue. Hey, this is launch now. It's not a waiting list anymore." And they never wrote back and never unbanned me. And I'm just like, okay, that's the way the world works, I guess, in some areas. So it's just crazy.
Funny you mentioned MCP. Now, I don't
Yeah,
think we talked about MCP much last year, did we?
it had just I mean, it was November, so it was. I mean, we talked probably I guess in December maybe, and so it was just like released. March was really the critical path for me of
Really?
when.
I thought
Oh,
MCP,
interesting.
is it only been around a year?
Yeah, they
It
Daniel, I
feels
think
so
his
much
name is.
longer.
Yeah, no, it was literally a year, and they just said something a couple weeks ago of like this is the 1 year anniversary, and they just donated it to like you said the
Right.
Linux Foundation. Um, but I mean, our experience, like I saw it come out in November last year, started to be like, oh, okay, there's starting to be standardization. Like I knew that was a good thing, but kind of held off, and then once all the coding agents and everybody kind of like popped in like February, March of this year, that's when we built our MCP server, and I literally built it over a weekend. And it was we were one of the first MCPs, like in that first group. We got a huge spike of signups, like just in that first
Uh-huh.
week. But then it was a lot of people were like, "Well, we don't really know what to do with this." Like they were signing up, but they're like, "I don't know, okay, it's cool, but I mean," and so it was interesting to see the pop, but also how it's developed over the rest of the year. Is I mean, even like I love the stuff that Sentry is doing, like with their MCP and a bunch of there's other kind of sort of
Well,
more
wait, they were the
forward.
ones that it wasn't it Century that had that PR out for like 3 months trying to add some security, what were they trying to do? They were trying to, like, add some, like, just the basic levels of authentication, and I
Yep,
remember that
yep.
caused, like that was, like, 3 months of comments for a single PR.
It was crazy, like, and I think things have sort of filtered out better now, but there was the first 6 months where like once it all got super hot, there was like some people that were kind of like, okay, they're like writing training on MCP and trying to make money that way, and some people were really focused on the standard. And I think until it kind of shook out as an early spec, it just wasn't a lot of people. It just wasn't moving fast enough, and I think that's mostly resolved now. But I mean, the whole OAuth story was a real painful story for like 6 months.
Yeah. Before we really start going into the details of MCP,
Yeah,
there is another question I wanted to ask you about it in that the very, very overlooked, compliment to MCP, at least in Google's eyes,
yeah,
A. And I remember when A2A was released, I thought, I think I see what problem they're trying to solve with this. This is kind of interesting. And I also thought this is only going to work if everybody adopts it. And I occasionally, again, Reddit is where I get a lot of I gauge how active something is. And there's an A2A subreddit. And if you go there, it's pretty quiet. Matter of fact, I think it was about a month ago, I even posted like, hey, anybody actually using A2A in
yeah,
anything that they're doing? Crickets.
yeah,
Crickets.
yeah,
The only response I got was somebody saying, I don't think so. And
yeah.
I mean, really. And so the question is, and Google, to their credit, they pretty much immediately donated A to the Linux Foundation when they released it. I think it was very soon thereafter. Yeah, I think almost immediately Google's like, we're releasing A and it's donated to the Linux Foundation. So I wonder, with all of Google's might, now maybe some of their past lack of success with open source is part of this. Why has A seen so little adoption, even though all of Google's might, Gemini is now, some people would say, is it the best model out there? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but nobody's I remember back, 2023, people were going, Google, where are you? Nobody's saying that anymore. Nobody's saying that anymore. Now people are saying, oh, gee, Google might win, you think. And why did MCP just catch like wildfire and A just got released to this resounding thud?
My guess, and this is my personal guess, is it's kind of an inside out, outside in question where MCP is you have an agent and you're calling a bunch of tools in a loop. MCP provides that standardization for a plugin model within a single agent, which I think is where most of the world is today. The A, and I'm not an expert on it at all, is I think it's more of an
Nobody
outside.
is.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think it's an outside in thing where it's agent. If it's literally agent communication, I don't know how many people are even doing that yet. Like, I mean, I
Yeah.
know, and that's where I feel is maybe it's a next year problem, or maybe it's a no problem at all. But it's
Oh, yeah.
like, is there really even a need other than hey, other than HTTP. I mean, like, I'm like if I or like, why can't one agent post a message on a queue, like something, some Kafka topic or something like that for another agent? Like, why do we need A2A? Like, and this is where like I honestly skimmed it when it first came out, haven't kept up with it, so I'm not familiar with it much at all. But I'm theoretically, is this where the problem is? Is like, is it? Are we just not there as an agent sort of model, a building model right now?
I think you're dead on. I think it's that. And I think that kind of goes back to what we were talking about a little bit earlier is that we're not nearly everybody's still playing catch up, and I think you're very right in that people are still doing things with, single agents, whereas A2A is really designed for what happens when you're trying to do discovery of systems that have hundreds of agents. You need a standardized way to understand, what does this agent do? What's it capable of? What's it called? How to identify it? And when I saw A2A, I go like, oh, I get what they're kind of trying to do, but then I think it's like you said, people aren't there yet. And here's a good example of that. I was at a lunch last week and was talking to, it was co-sponsored by very large law firm that is very well known in the tech community. And I was talking to one of their staff and saying, hey, where are you guys in kind of this? We were working on some stuff for legal use cases, going back 2023. And I remember we would show this to people and they would just kind of, deer in headlights. And I also kind of felt like, they saw like like when we would show them the automation, I kind of felt like they were seeing their billable hours just like, evaporate
Yeah,
before
yeah.
their eyes.
It goes against how they make their money. I mean, that's the thing. Yeah.
Right. So I asked, where are you guys now? And he said, yeah, yeah, we use Harvey a little bit, but it's too generic. It doesn't really dive into the individual domains, so it doesn't really drive value, which is, by the way, the first person I've ever even say, lawyer that's ever told me they used Harvey. So that
Yeah.
was the first. And he said, they actually have a team that's trying to build some of this stuff, in-house. And trying to kind of, I guess, augment or even maybe, I don't even know if they're trying to replace Harvey or they're trying to augment it. But, he said, and I mean, what they're talking about is RAG, really,
Yeah.
but, or graph RAG or whatever you want to call it. But I thought it was interesting that if you look at if you listen to all the podcasts and you look at social media and you hear the news about AI, you would go like, oh, well, this is solved. Well, not only is it not solved, people are just now starting to work on it. And they're finding that these, solutions that people are claiming have solved it don't solve the problem. And are now going like, oh, we're having to rethink how we do this. What it, it seems like, it goes back to what we've been the prevailing wisdom versus what's, appearance versus reality. The appearance is, these things are solved. These companies are raking in the money, which maybe they are, maybe they aren't. I I don't I don't get it. If they are, I don't see where it's coming from, which we could probably do an entire other episode on. Are
Yeah.
these companies really making all, because we talk to enterprises all the time and we go, are you using these tools? And the answer is almost always no. So
Yeah.
like, but it seems like it's exactly what you're saying. All the people, all the hypers, social media, what you hear on the news, oh, agentic systems, AGI, when the reality is people are still just like at the starting gate with
Yeah.
trying to deploy a single agent in production. I think very few enterprises have moved past that POC phase with any of this technology. And there's just such a wide disconnect between, the social media, just the AI prevailing wisdom
Yeah.
versus what we're actually seeing when we talk to enterprises.
I think the other thing is, I was thinking about it this week, is if you look at like my family and like, I mean, the extended family at different ages and different things like that, and my kids are now grown in their 20s, like the acceptance of the internet versus the acceptance of AI. Like I look at my 80 something year old father who has an iPhone and barely can use it. I mean, he's still pretty, I mean, not very savvy, but he's like, I mean, he uses it. But he would have no idea about AI yet. He's not using ChatGPT. Like, and then even my family, like you go down the age group, I mean, internet usage is super high through all of my
Mhm.
family, but AI usage, like my son knows about, like, I mean, AI video generation and like, image
Mhm.
generation and knows about video games and is kind of, and using ChatGPT a little bit. My daughter is in grad school, so like there's AI being used for maybe writing and things, but even just the day to day, like, I mean, I'll ask ChatGPT more over Googling. Like, I just don't even go to Google anymore. I only use ChatGPT for the basic kind of questions because it can do the research behind the
Hmm.
scenes now. And it's a superset of Google. And I mean, until when are we going to have full acceptance like we have my dad using like using an iPhone? When would he just be like, oh yeah, I need to like to go to ChatGPT to like I don't know pay my bill or something like that or whatever? Like it's it's probably going to be years still. I mean, until that full acceptance goes all the way up the chain. And
Hmm.
I think for me, it's potential energy. It's how I mean, there's still so much to be achieved
Yeah.
when you have that same kind of acceptance level and so that's why I think what you're it kind of dovetails into like the a lawyer or a different firm. I mean, they're still so early with figuring this out, but also
Hmm.
what's happening is the model training is getting so good that like fine tuning. Like, is anybody really fine tuning models for the most part? Like for the average 80% use case, because are the models just well trained enough and have enough knowledge built in that they can just answer the question, like for basic law, for basic medical stuff like that. And so I think that's changing too. Is I mean, there are some people who are saying, oh yeah, it's just going to be a ton of vertical models that for all these things, but with the baseline model changing so quickly, how do you keep retraining? Like, I mean, and like creating fine tunings. Like, what are you creating them every
Hmm.
month? I mean, off a new model generation. And so I think there's this dichotomy
Yeah.
of vertical AI against horizontal AI that's happening as well.
2 points come to mind for that one for me. And the first is, uh, I'm a Georgia Tech alumni, and I've been reaching out to their open source program office, and recently connected with them, have a chat, and even they even have a student run organization for open
Yeah,
source software now called LibreTech. So shout out to those guys. They're actually trying to, really trying to be a voice in the open source, community about how to manage open source software. So it's, great to see the next generation actually care about something mundane like software licensing. But when I talked about the open source program office, I asked, because they said, we're actually, trying to get, AI tools in the hands of students. We want them to deploy in cloud and all of this kind of stuff. And, they talked about a lot of, the stuff that we work with. So, they're in the ballpark. They know what's going on. And I said, well, what about, I see all these other universities around the country that also have open source program offices. What are they doing? Are they doing similar stuff to you at Georgia Tech? And they said, surprisingly, there's a r- no. He said it's because I could tell that he was a little, kind of taken, like stunned at what he's seeing himself. He said a large portion of universities around the United States are very kind of anti-cloud and anti-AI to the point, I guess they're not exposing their students to them at all, which yeah, I don't even know, how to respond to that. I feel that I don't know where that's coming from. I don't know if it's for, political reasons, ideological reasons, but it's kind of what you're talking about is that things that we think are just absolutely, pervasive to us on a
yeah,
day-to-day basis, there's it sounded like more likely than not, you might be graduating from a major US institution with a computer science degree from an institute that doesn't want to teach you anything about AI tools or about how to use cloud. And I don't even know for what reasons why. Now, the second point, and this is one that we actually kind of debate internally quite a bit too. And I'm on the fence. I don't know the answer to this. I don't know when we're going to get an answer to this one. Is the fine tuning problem? As people haven't given up on that. And I've seen because I go to a lot of AI infra events, so I know the really exciting ones. And there have been a lot of people giving talks recently about model pruning, being able to take a small model and make it significantly smaller. I think, I saw a talk where they were taking 12 billion, 14 billion parameter models and pruning it down to a 4 billion parameter footprint. And in doing the pruning the right way, getting the same level of performance, and then doing what people are calling continuous fine tuning so that the model has this continuous fine tuning loop. They were seeing, huge performance gains. And to your point, and I don't know the answer to this, and I don't even know how we're going to measure it, which is another problem, is I tend to actually be on, I think, kind of what you're saying is that, why would you bother fine tuning when people are releasing open models that have incredible performance? They're open source. I'm shocked to see there are people, some of the Chinese models, like the Kimi models, were released under MIT license.
Yeah,
Wow, the least permissive license possible. Just take the whole thing, do whatever you will with it. Um, so why bother fine tuning when you have people, you know, with experts, people that are doing all the data cleaning, doing all the processing, and you just have good data infrastructure that can leverage these models and you'll get good results? Or does the continuous fine tuning and pruning, what I guess the question becomes, and again, I don't know how to measure this, maybe you have an idea on it, is there's a cost and a resource required to do
yeah.
all this continuous fine tuning. Is there a way to quantify the benefit to know if you are getting a return on investment? Or
Yeah.
is it as simple as you think the return on investment is coming from the fact that it's your model, your data, it's your competitive advantage?
It's a really interesting point because I mean there is still such a gap between the leading kind of frontier models from the big companies and the open source. And I think there's been a lot of talk that people think. I mean, it's like okay, at some point it'll converge, but it's like they're both moving up in lockstep
Mhm.
almost, and like the gap is still very huge. And I mean, we have a customer who was like really leaning into GraphRag last year and leaning into creating their own corpus and probably thinking about fine tuning. And now they're realizing all that data that we were trying to stuff into the model is now already in the model. And like they went
Mm,
to all this trouble where now we don't
right.
have to provide all this context. It actually already knows. I mean, and so I think that's a case where how do you codify that ROI of like you think you might be doing something unique in one direction, and now it's just become commoditized. And so I think it's a really hard. I mean, I'm glad at least we're not in that business because it would be really hard to kind of keep proving on how do you keep throwing money at fine tuning or model training or things like that
Mhm.
when hell, I mean, Opus 4.5 comes out and eats your lunch. And it's, I mean, for us at least, we're agnostic. I mean, we just get better when they get better, as I mean, I imagine you
Right.
guys are. And so, it's
Yeah, same way.
it's a really interesting. I mean, it's an interesting thing where I think the best companies can benefit from it and are not like you don't have that like somebody over your shoulder waiting to stomp on you when you're training your own model.
Yeah, I mean, we're the same way. I mean, that's very much been our philosophy, and my philosophy is that why would you want to do all this work when give it a few months at most and somebody's going to come out with
Yeah,
a model, a step in performance, and
yeah,
it's going to be open source and you can just freely take it? So I guess that is a really interesting question, is, is there a use case for it? And, who is that use case for? I know that some of the people doing this continuous fine tuning are doing it in very sensitive areas. One of the ones I heard about was kind
yeah.
of fraud detection. So, maybe that's kind of the use cases where you're dealing with very sensitive data, or the data is changing very rapidly, very dynamic data.
That
But,
makes sense.
like you
That makes
said,
sense.
but that would also paint it into a very, very kind of, small niche, which is something that I
Yeah,
learned, going back last year, is that um, if you start talking to VCs about fine tuning and model training, they kind of quickly go like, I'm out. A
yeah,
lot of money was lost on those types of ventures because of exactly, just, give it 3 months and all of a sudden there's going to be a new family, a new generation of these
yeah.
models coming out there that are just going to be, like you said, oh, this data wasn't in that model, it's in this one though, guess we didn't need to do all
Mhm.
that.
Well, it's
So,
interesting. I mean, in this kind of generation, the other part that I thought of is I think we talked about this in the last year, but the kind of agentic workflow of prompt to agents or prompt to workflow, and how there was a series of companies that were like all about like building the framework, the infrastructure for calling the tools and those kind of things. And there's a lot of code still that you'd have to write for that.
mhm,
And I predicted, or at least in my head, I don't remember if we talked about this, of saying, look, that's going to go away, and it's just going to be prompt to tools. Like you're going to be able to prompt and have the model figure it out of the right kind of thing. And honestly, that's what we're seeing now with these agent harnesses, like for coding, especially like Claude Code, and a lot of these essentially now we've removed the coding middleman, and it's like it's just model tool calling, optionally MCP, and the models are just so good that it's almost like they're writing the code themselves, the logic for
mhm,
that flow. And I was just wondering if that was on something on your radar, because it's an area that like I was like, oh, I mean, we don't want to build our own agentic framework. Like, I mean, there's a
mhm.
lot of companies out there doing that. Like, we just kind of punted and said, look, I think it's going to go away. And I really do think that's something in this last year that has really moved. And like, if we were going to build some agentic thing, you could just write it on the Claude Code SDK. I mean, and
Right.
add your tools to do it, and just like it'll just work. And that's where we've kind of pivoted to say, look, we're not delivering the full RAG pipeline as much. We're delivering tools you could put into your own tool calling framework or tool like and and it's like it's more the picks and shovels than the whole the whole pipeline. And I think it's an interesting change.
Yeah, that's actually an interesting one that we talk about a lot too, is that we TrustGraph is kind of it's the entire, end-to-end platform, if you would like it. It kinda has all these features.
Yeah.
We often find people going, "Well, I just want this piece of it." Well, that wasn't the idea behind that, that people would just wanna piecemeal these individual things out. That just kinda it's not gonna so we've actually been thinking about that a lot lately, is just kinda what we call, customer on-ramps, is
Mm,
that, if somebody already has existing stacks, what piece of the system would they want to use, and how would they
yeah.
be able to just use it? And some of that is kind of what you're talking about right now. As Mark and I were actually talking about this before we jumped on this call, is kind of an automated way of creating these workflows and these processors that connect. Um, but one of the barriers that we see is actually on the infrastructure layer. I find that that's actually kind of become a bit of a sticky point, in that
Hmm.
TrustGraph is built on top of Apache Pulsar, which doesn't have a lot of adoption, despite being the best data streaming platform out there that's cloud native. It just doesn't have as much adoption as Kafka does. And you still have other people using MQTT because they want that kind of really lightweight pub sub broker system. And then you have kind of the real time people that are using DDS. And, right now we kind of have, we just kind of built around Pulsar and didn't really think, well, what happens when we need to deploy it in these other environments that aren't going to be, cloud native, that want to kind of do it this other way. So we're debating on what's the best way to do that, on how we take TrustGraph or maybe TrustGraph Core and separate it from that data streaming, or I don't even know what the best term for that layer is anymore. Because I don't think people think about MQTT as data streaming. That tended to be the whole Kafka Pulsar bunch. But just that kind of data broker layer.
Yeah.
And one of the things I also find is that uh, it's astonishing how complex those technologies are in themselves. I did an entire series of videos talking about some of that, and just scratching the surface of how complex those technologies are, and how they don't play well with each other. That's something that we saw with Kafka and Pulsar. Seem on the surface, shouldn't they be, its topics, its queues, shouldn't all this stuff be interoperable? And the answer is not even
Hmm.
close. It's a huge amount of work to either have the Kafka to Pulsar bridges to try to run Kafka on top of Pulsar. Uh, it's a lot of work. It's a
Mhm.
lot of work. These things are not trivial by any stretch of the imagination. So, and that kind of gets into the whole interoperability thing about, um, and that's a little bit of what MCP was supposed to be about. Is
Yeah.
I think, and this will kind of tee up where I want to go with this in the next topic is interoperability. I hear a lot of people talking about that now, but what does interoperability mean to you?
Mhm. I mean, I think it ties into this question of CLI versus MCP that people are bringing up as
Hmm.
well. And like to me, it's about the LLM having a contract with the thing that's providing the services. And so there's a some interoperability. It's not between the tools. It's between the LLM and a tool or a group of tools in my mind. And it's a way to say it's all about discovery for me. Is
Hmm.
how does
Hmm.
the LLM know what it's capable of doing to augment its agentic workflow, a loop basically,
Hmm.
and the MCP is a way to advertise a bundle of tools. Um, and I mean, this also ties into the new guidance from Anthropic that said use dynamic tool discovery, like just have one tool for search, one tool for describe, one tool for execute. And we actually just moved over to that for our new Graphlet MCP server because it saves on the context window tokens and it's more of I mean, it's a two-hit thing where you have to search and then call. It does, you don't have to fill the context window with everything. So I think, I mean, a little bit of a tangent, but I think interoperability is really, it's about plug and play for me. It's the old Photoshop plugin model where number one, it's discovery. You can now figure out, okay, what can I even work with? Number two, it's a data contract of, hey, I can now have, I mean, like plug and play this tool and then replace it with this other tool or whatever. And also it's the LM figuring out like, what do I need to conform to that contract? What's my search terms? What filter options do I have? All that kind of thing. And then the last thing is it's just the way it's like, how do you then like try and monetize that and even advertise and say, oh, here's what I'm offering as a service, and I can now put a face on it that's not just an API. It's a bundle of more task oriented tools. And I think that's the other thing in this last year we've seen is it's not just a bunch of posts and gets from like a REST interface. It's it's a small number of tools that are like more cohesive and more task oriented. I think that's where I'm kind of seeing MCP kind of evolve into, and that I mean, and hopefully that gives us a place to now start being more interoperable.
You talked about monetizing interoperability and like that was like ooh, I we probably chatted. I have a long history with interoperability of military systems
Yep.
and large scale interoperability at unparalleled scales in the commercial world. I'll say it that way. And when you said commercial, you're monetizing interoperability, my immediate question is because I don't have an answer to this, but do you?
Mhm.
Can you think of anybody that ever did that, that actually successfully commercialized interoperability and made it work?
I mean, I always go back to Photoshop. I mean, the Photoshop plugin model of 20,
You
25
really
years
want to?
ago.
You really want to rest your hat on Adobe, right?
I mean, I know, it created a cottage industry that people could, and even like there's people creating it for like audio plugins for other tools and things like that. It created a cottage industry where they could create a small piece of functionality, expose it in a standardized way, and essentially get revenue, monetize it. And it was something where there was a standard interoperable schema, an API that they had to fit
Hmm.
into to make it work. And then you could, I mean, and in a way, it's almost like it was like a plugin store. And I think there's been a couple different, and I did do some research on this earlier this year of like, how long did it take for the Photoshop plugin, whatever you want to call spec, to really gain like stability? And it took like 3 years, if I remember right, like 3 or 4 years from when it first was released to like iterations. And there was like an iteration that really opened up the doors. And then I was like, okay, well, everybody's like expecting MCP to be that in 3 months when it first got released. And so I think I kind of took a longer view of in the industry, it just takes a couple iterations, a couple big trigger points, like cursor. I look at a huge trigger point for MCP, like of when tools could be called, um, and then Claude Code, and then all these things. But it takes a couple of those step functions to
Yeah.
happen. Um, but who knows? I mean, we could have something totally subsume it, but I really thought either OpenAI is going to come out with something better or more standard if they have more pull and
Is there any
replace
indication that they're working on anything? Not that I'm aware
they
of.
from what I understand, they gave up on trying, and they said we're an MCP in and that
Hmm.
was like 3 or 6 months ago, and that was really the point. And then Microsoft did the same thing, and now they're all basically supporting this MCP thing through the Linux Foundation, and it's like they had their chance, and it's it's like I think that was the time when okay, somebody's going to come out and a bigger shark's going to eat a littler shark, and it never happened. And so I think that was super interesting to me is they kind of deferred and said, okay, this is going to be it. I mean, this is going to be our spec moving forward, and that's why A2A kind of went on the wayside too. And so
Hmm. So the Adobe one, the Photoshop one, I find that really interesting because, and again, I'm maybe a little bit different because of my experience.
yeah,
That's kind of not how I think of interoperability. But like I said, I think I'm probably in the minority on how I think about interoperability. But what you described to me also sounds like the Salesforce ecosystem. It sounds like the Snowflake and Databricks ecosystem. I mean, do you think that also qualifies as interoperability?
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think if you're like even a Slack app, I mean, like a Slack or a Salesforce app or like those
Mhm.
Force apps. I mean, once you have a
Does Slack still have that kind of developer ecosystem?
good question. I'm not sure if it still does. I know that they changed a lot for like third party. They're trying to like be a little
Yeah.
more insular, I think. But originally, I mean, you could go buy a Slack app for your. I mean, or Jira. I mean, Atlassian had it. You could buy Jira plugins, and that would like help out with your ecosystem. And I think any of those where you have a platform ecosystem, you start to give like a plugin model to it
Mhm.
that people can make money on. I think makes it stickier. And so I think for me, I mean, the essentially we're looking for like an LLM plugin like spec, and I think MCP is the first one of it. But it's a marketplace. Excuse me, it's a marketplace essentially because you have to have the client support it and the server support it. And in that case, like you can't have they had to have some stability between when Microsoft when VS Code and Copilot or Cursor or Claude Code want to support something as a plugin model like they all aren't going to want to do their own API spec. Like you want to write one plugin for everybody um, because they're all so similar. And so I think that's kind of what this is more evolved into at this.
That's interesting. That's I've never thought about it that way. I mean, that's a really interesting way of looking at it. And that kind of leads me to what some people have said the year 2026 is going to be about. And this is something that I guess maybe is a little bit about more about um, interoperability is information exchange. And I want to
Yeah,
quickly just do some definitions here because I don't know that everybody's
yeah,
going to know these terms. And Kirk, if you disagree with one of me on how I'm defining these, please jump in.
sure, sure.
I find there's four terms that get used a lot
Mhm.
interchangeably and they're not. And that's vocabularies, taxonomies, schemas, and ontologies. The word
Yeah,
of the day, ontology.
yeah,
So I think we all know what vocabularies are. That's like word definition. A taxonomy is where you create like a hierarchy of that. So now you have a set of terms for a particular domain. Like if you're a surgeon, you have terms that you use for that. If you're a pilot, you have terms that you use for that. So that would be a taxonomy, but still it's term definition. But then we get into schemas and ontologies. And the difference between those two is that vocabularies and taxonomies are human readable. They're designed for us. Schemas and ontologies are machine readable. They're designed for machines. And schemas are mostly designed for being able to structure information for retrieval. So I store it in a system and I can get it back. Whereas ontologies tend to be more for exchanging information between systems. Now, some people will argue that an ontology is kind of a combination of all of the above. It has all the hierarchy, it has all the relationships. Well, if you with schemas, you can do the same thing with different, hierarchies. If you take JSON, you can do nested objects, and all of a sudden you have all that as well. I mean, it's an eyesore, but you can do it.
Mhm.
So just kind of get that out of the way because I do find that these terms get used a lot. And one of the reasons why we've been talking about ontologies is we kind of released our new ontology features, and we're shocked. We were legitimately shocked at the attention we got for it.
Mm.
We, I checked, and when we posted on our knowledge graph, that is, I don't know if I do know within the last year it is the top post that's been on that subreddit,
Wow.
which
Yeah.
shocking to me. Had no idea. We ended up in an AI newsletter, the Neuron, which
Oh, yeah.
don't still don't know how they found us. I actually asked them; they never responded, and they featured us in one of their list of new tools that we had just announced our ontology features. Um, all of a sudden, got all these people that we've never heard from before saying, "Oh, this is exactly what I'm working on. This is exactly what I've been looking for. I've been wanting to work on ontologies with AI," and now people are saying like, ontologies, this is going to be the year, this is going to be the buzzword for 2026. And I'm thinking, this is what I thought it was going to be for 2024, which kind of goes
Yeah.
full circle back to that. These things are happening,
Yeah.
but at a much slower pace than I know I anticipated.
Yeah.
I don't, and I think a lot of people anticipated. And where do you see? I know you're pretty pro ontology, knowing how a little bit about how GraphLit is designed. So
Yeah.
where do you think we're going on ontologies? How are people going to use them? Because I do have a caveat on ontologies, which is once again going to put me off in a minority. But do you think 2026 is going to be the year of ontologies, and why?
It's a good question. I mean, and yeah, for our platform is based on schema.org. And so we have an opinionated data model for our entities that everything essentially can be a JSON LV like serialization. And so that's kind of where the schema comes into play and the taxonomy and things. And
Do,
so
do,
it can
do we need
subclass.
to just quickly? Do we just need to quickly talk about the semantic web?
Yeah, we can. I mean, but it's crazy because, I mean, I remember thinking about this stuff in grad school. I mean, that was a long time ago, and
Yeah.
the
Oh, yeah.
semantic web and all this kind of stuff was just coming. I mean, starting to be, I mean, kind of, I mean, first come out, bubble up, and I mean, I think that's why I don't even know if I could predict it's a 2026 thing or 2027 thing. I mean, hell, we were dealing with these kind of things. I mean, 20 years ago, and
Yes.
I think it's
Well, the
to
RDF
me
stack goes back to the
the
late '90s.
yeah. Oh yeah, I mean, and the schema stuff, it's data transport. I mean, you're persisting data,
Yes.
you're loading data. I mean, and that you're always going to need something as a wire protocol, essentially, or a storage protocol. And I think that's kind of, I mean, a physical representation almost, or at least a digital bits representation of the data. But I think, and we take an opinionated model where, I mean, if someone has entities that they want to store that we don't store, we try and map them to schema.org. And we say, look, I mean, oh, an investment fund. And I go, oh, look, that actually already exists as a type in there. Let's add it to our data model so we can expose it on our API. We don't do like custom entities today. We have like a label, which is like a most generic like thing entity.
Hmm.
But people, I mean, it's something we get asked occasionally, but typically they can map their world, their organizational data to schema.org. And I think it's in one way it differentiates us because we're opinionated about it. In another way, I'm sure there's things it leaves us out of if you want complete flexibility in this space. Um, but I think it gives us a way that we can, once you know your domain, it's easier to kind of lean into that because then we can do entity extraction automatically. We can do other things because we know the set of types and classes that we're going to be able to pull back. And I mean, who knows? I mean, maybe next year we do custom entities, but at this point, we're very leaned in to this concept.
And boy, talk about a domain where people have strong opinions, ontologies. Talk to
Yeah,
graph people, and you'll find very strong opinions about RDS, OWL,
Yep.
SCOs, any of them. Or Mark has a great story of someone he used to work with. He said that, and he said this is not an exaggeration. He said would literally start frothing at the mouth if you started
Yeah.
talking about property graphs versus semantic web. And people have very strong opinions about that. I think, but that's an important point that the semantic web, the concept of the semantic web, is not new at all. It's been 20
Yeah.
years. And the whole idea is that kind of exactly what people are trying to do with AI now is you're trying to
Yeah.
exchange information in a much more natural language fashion and being able to classify information in more general, broader senses, more conceptual than just, a typical schema where you have like I have, how many shoes do I have? Five. How many hats do I have? Two. Trying to capture richer semantic relationships. And to me, I think a lot of that is interoperability. So is that kind of is MCP going to go that direction? Is somebody going to bring it
That's a
into it?
great
Are
question.
these things
Yeah.
going to meet in the middle or not at all?
See, that actually is a really good question because it's
I'll pat
or,
myself on the
or, or I know, I mean, it's something that I like originally. That was one of the missing pieces I saw with MCP is we leaned in early to resources and we say, look, our query will return a list of resources. And I think a lot at the original point, a lot of people at an MCP tool were just returning raw JSON. But we kind of said, well, look, we already have these objects in the database. They have a GUID that you can reference them from. So why don't we return a resource URI? And if you want to go back and retrieve them, you just call the get resource that's in MCP and load the JSON from there. And so it's kind of a two-step, but it gives us a way to have a data model that, okay, we have a content resource that has a content data model in a JSON schema. And it just seemed clean to us. But I think the other side of it then is there's no interoperability other than with ourselves. And no one's thinking about, I can't give one of our resource URIs to you, and you could just be like, hey, I'm going to load this, or I'm going to give, or you're not going to know what our content schema is for something. And
Mm,
that's where we were like, oh, well, okay, this is cool. Like we could share this data. Um, if it was like if our return type was a schema.org type, and you knew you supported schema.org or JSON-LD, you could read it from our MCP server or something like that, or know what to do with it. And so, I mean, it's type safety. I mean, at the end of the day, it's
mhm.
like strong typing on the data. And I think that's where I looked into this and I was like, wow, they're not really thinking about this at all. Like, at least,
No,
I mean,
no.
they leave that as an exercise to the reader. And I found that super interesting where I don't know if that was intentional or not. I've never talked to them about it, but it's like, I mean, I'm old enough to like have been through the soap and all those kind of wars and things like that, and so much of it feels like we're rehashing all that. And I worked on a project at Microsoft. It was I can't remember the term. It was a soap discovery protocol, and it was something where you could like publish soap servers and you could like discover the right one and this and that and like it was actually I think they put it into Windows Server at the time, but it's like the same kind of concept. Is now we have MCP registry, and it's like, well, how do you find these things? How do you search for them?
Mm,
And I think this happened after we like last year, but we built an MCP registry like by just basically scraping all of the GitHub sites for the early MCP servers and putting it into our RAG kind of pipeline that you can
mhm.
essentially prompt to find an MCP server. And it like worked. Nobody gave a shit. Like nobody cared. And like you remember us talking about this Mick Poogle idea that I had
Oh,
of like
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and it like it worked. It was great. Like, but nobody cared at all. And
Yeah,
then
I that one
yeah,
genuinely surprised me. I just
yeah,
I remember you telling me about that. I'm like, I thought that was gonna be like your viral moment. I thought this was gonna be the top of
yeah,
hacker news, and I thought I was gonna hear everybody talking about it. It's just like, what
yeah.
happened? Like, I thought
It's
this was
and
been
I just took it down. I just at the end of the day I was like, ah, screw it. I'm not going to pay the money on Vercel to like keep it up anymore. And now we're seeing MCP registry. or I can rebuild that using MCP registry data as the source rather than us doing scraping. And but still, it's a classic. Like, are there really enough MCP users out there to make it worthwhile? And I think we haven't touched on that yet, but that's the big question these days. The meme is like all the people writing MCP servers that like lined up and how many users. And there's like nobody at that station, and that could be I mean, an interesting kind of way to
Yeah.
tie this all up together.
Well, to be, I know I think the situation is different for you, but I don't think I have not had any of our trust graph users say to me that MCP was something that they came to us for or was even really important to them. That's not
Mhm.
saying that there's somebody out there not using it for that, but nobody has said to me that that was something that they were really actively using TrustGraph for was the MCP connectivity.
Yeah. The interesting
And
thing, we do now. And like
yeah,
we actually have a few customers who literally came to us and they're like, "Oh, this is great. Can you actually expose this as a remote server and like have our corpus of data that you upload and ingest and everything?" And now we used to have our local NPX server. They just wanted a fully OAuth remote server to plug into their agents. And essentially, I was like, "Oh yeah, we could do that too." I mean, we had it for Zine, and I basically just kind of built it out for Graphlet natively. And so we have people now that that's the way they want to consume the data. And I think it's
mm,
perfect for us. Like it essentially is like they can use our SDKs for input, but they can use MCP for output in a lot of ways from their kind of corpus.
yeah, it's interesting. I don't have an answer why. I also find it fascinating too that it seems that um, user base for Graphlet and TrustGraph seems to be just totally mutually exclusive. We seem to just
Yeah,
attract totally different people. I don't
yeah,
necessarily know why that is, but we do. We get people building intelligent systems and wanting to do a lot of cybersecurity stuff or big financial
yeah.
data. And for some reason, just they seem to I don't know, they seem to be mutually exclusive, which we could spend a lot of time talking about that, but
Yeah.
we can also spend a lot of time talking about is anybody really using MCP. Uh, don't want to go down that, or maybe we do, maybe we don't. Maybe that'd be that could be a good
That's a
follow up episode. That would get us
that's a good 20.
canceled.
Yeah, that's a good 2026 question. I think that'll be the big thing to look at next year is like
Okay,
what.
okay, you teed it up.
Yeah,
2026, go.
I mean, I think MCP adoption is going to be one of the big. Is this real? Is it not? I think I'm really
Uh-huh.
curious to see how this next year goes.
But
I
what
think
does MCPD adoption look like? What would be a signal that it's working?
that's a great question because I think there's a lot of startups that came out this year for MCP observability, MCP deployment, MCP security, like,
Hmm.
and I'm really curious if that's going to be if they're going to take off. Like, is this a real? Was that premature, or is this just going to be like part of a bigger platform? Like, is it just going to be like, yeah, okay, everybody, Vercel has MCP now, Google has MCP now. Like, is I really don't know. I mean, it could go a bunch of different directions, I think. And to your point of like, what's the criteria? I mean, I think is the MCP registry really going to have actively used MCP servers, and is there really a there? I think for MCP as a true ecosystem, that I hope. I mean, I think it would be great if it does because I think it would open up a lot of other stuff. But I mean, it's you could also see it being slow and potentially not. Or it could be something where like the bits and pieces of it like
Hmm.
start to standardize and get reused. And that's like when I was at Microsoft, we were working on something that was very it was like it was more of a application layer for the internet, not the web. And then it got subsumed by the web. But a lot of the interesting things we were working on got put into internet standards like OLE controls and those kind of things, and they evolved into the browser. And so I'm curious, like, is this going to be where maybe this ends up just being standardized in the application layer in these browser, in essentially these like LLM browsers and things like that, because that's where it starts to feel like it's that same Java plugin, Java applet world again in a lot of ways, because
Hmm.
essentially that's another case of interoperability. There had to be something that the client and this thing connect on and have pins that connect. And it feels like we're just doing that all over again.
Right, and it also makes me wonder, does this go back to something you just said when we talked about the Photoshop analogy, or Snowflake, or Databricks, or Salesforce. I can't believe I almost
Yeah.
forgot the name Salesforce living in San Francisco. Is it going to take an ecosystem of companies that are able to commercialize MCP to really keep it alive? Or is that not going to be a prerequisite this time?
I mean, I think it's a chicken and egg where I think it kind of has to, just because if there's no use, if it's not monetizing for anybody, either on the server or the client side, it's just going to die as a standard, I would imagine. Like, because I mean, it's to dedicate, not just from dedicating the resources of the people, but it's dedicating just the mind share. Like they might just move on to something more interesting. Where like I mean, our past worlds and I mean, are different. Where mine was in broadcast, where you're thinking SMPTE standards and all these different like broadcast standards, where interoperability is a must-have, because
Right.
if your machine for playing out something isn't compatible with the spec that I wrote for the file, you're not going to be able to go to air. And we dealt with a ton of that for years. I mean, that was 10 years of my life in broadcast of like, it could be I mean, we had one where it was like a checksum was calculated differently, or somebody had a bug that they weren't calculating it properly, and so the player couldn't play it. And that's that kind
Mm.
of like deep interoperability that I mean, are we going to have to see that kind of thing at this point where everybody standardizes on something and it's like, this ties a lot into MCP UI, where people are now saying, well, what if your MCP server comes with a presentation layer now? And you're starting to see that now with,
Presentation layer, that's a term I haven't heard in years. That's a
yeah,
golden oldie from the
yeah.
OSI model.
Well, it's like if you look at like what ChatGPT and the OpenAI apps are now talking about, the Apps SDK, essentially it's a projection of the data, and you're having some interaction with the user. And that's where I see another case of interoperability. Like you're just talking job applets and OLE controls again. Like it's something that has a back end, it has a persistence model, and it has a presentation side. And it's crazy to think that we've now full circled this again.
What is old will become new again. So I
Yep.
forced you to talk about MCP though. So what else you got for 2026? What's your stand? Here's your soapbox. Give it to
Yeah.
me.
I mean, I'm a big fan. We haven't talked about this all, I think, here is the agentic coding agents. I mean, the Claude
Okay.
Code, the Factory Droid, I mean, I've seen it personally, and even as an old school developer, how fast I can build stuff, and even build stuff that maybe isn't in my sweet spot. Like building UI when I don't consider myself a front end developer. Like I think that has changed. I think it's under maybe like not as well known or not talked about as much of how quickly people can build apps and build things. And I think it ties into the whole build or buy scenario for companies
Oh
now
yeah.
of
Oh yeah.
like, I think there's going to be where that bar is of, well, shit, if I can just get Cursor to build it in a week, you're essentially copying code almost out of the model, versus buying something or using open source or doing things. So the bar for a service and API you might pay for will change. And I think that's really one of those cases where even now, like I've done it myself with OAuth. Like, why do I need an OAuth provider to have support OAuth for my MCP server when I can just have Claude just write it, like,
Right.
and store it in Redis, like do whatever. Like it knows how to rebuild these things that are like now commoditizing. And that's where, but if you look at that in that picture, Redis is still there. So like nobody's rebuilding Redis, nobody's rebuilding Postgres, like for their own needs.
Because it takes that takes years.
Well, that's the thing. So the bar of what you're going to live on top of and sit your shoulders on top of
Yeah.
probably changes. And we're trying to be one of those things that people sit on top of their shoulders and say,
Hmm.
look, here's an
Hey, I
API.
thought
Don't
we
worry
were
about.
trying to be one of those things that people sit on top of.
Well, I think it's different. I mean, it's like, and that's where we're trying to like organize ourselves of, like, I mean, it's funny that yeah, we don't seem to overlap even though we're very similar.
No.
But
Yeah.
I mean, and for better or for worse, I think it's trying to navigate that market of these kind of context layer and memory companies and things like that. And it's like, I mean, for us too, it's the memory side of agentic versus the context side. I think you're seeing a lot of memory companies, but is it going to be something where Cursor or Claude could just build you a memory layer? I mean, if you plug in Postgres or Redis, is that just going to be something that people can just build? Or even for us, I mean, it's not magic to like go read data from Google Drive and pull it out and put it into a vector database, but it's a pain in the ass. Like, I mean, it's and to then do it for OneDrive, to do it for SharePoint, to do it for blob storage, and that's our value is we canonicalize all that. But is there a point when people are just going to be like, ah, I'm just going to build it up myself? And so I think as a my TLDR of this is, I think companies are going to really have to look and prioritize features that are not as easy to build with AI. That's kind of my point. So
Well, it's interesting because as you're saying all that, I'm thinking like, well, this is actually you're diving right into one of the things that I wanted to talk about for 2026, and that's it goes back to we see so many companies now that it's very obvious they're following a consulting model. Any company that's hiring for forward deployed engineers, this is the Palantir model of we're going to build this solution for you. And that's what I've been seeing though, is that there's so much open source software that's out there now. It's because, like we said, we've been talking about it earlier. Every day on Reddit, somebody's posting like, "Hey, look what I built," and almost all of it's MIT licensed. People don't post stuff with you don't even see
yeah,
copyleft licenses all that much. And now with Claude Code, Cursor, et cetera, getting really good, all of a sudden you just start being able to take that and as a building block,
yeah,
you start pulling in other building blocks and one person can cobble together a complex solution even in a couple of days, let alone a team of developers with resources. So I started going, how long is this business model going to last when
yeah,
your business model is like, hey, I'm going to sell you a bunch of forward deployed engineers that are going to come in and help you build this stuff when, somebody's saying like, well, Claude Code is our forward deployed engineer and he costs a whole
yeah.
lot less.
Well, I mean,
And
we just wrote this into our next pitch memo for fundraising. Of we're calling it forward deployed agents. Like, can we package up? I mean, it's somewhat tongue in cheek, but it's like it's exactly what you said.
oh boy,
Yeah, I mean,
you
it's
really
tongue
have
in
been
cheek.
reading my mind.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's what if you took Claude Code, your own SDK, a bunch of documentation and sample code, and you said, hey, have the customer talk to it of what it wants and just build and like glue code or whatever and pull it in. I mean, like we could almost do that today. And
Oh
with
yeah,
some,
yeah,
I mean, with
oh
some
yeah.
product ownery kind of person and maybe with some design skills kind of gluing like that slower deployed engineer becomes more PM-ish in a way and maybe like to kind of guide the process architect PM product like I think that tied into these I think there's a huge opportunity there because that's where you're going to start to get the vertical AI vertical apps like and then but then you start to say well what is the infrastructure layer to support that.
Right. I have two final points I want to make about 2026. I don't think any of them are particularly going to be surprising. I think the first is quite simple. I think we're not hitting the accelerator. I think the foot's kind of on. I don't want to say it's on the brake pedal, but I think if people are expecting huge innovation in 2026, I don't expect it. I think
Yeah.
we've seen the innovation, like we said, that maturity curve. It's kind of
Hmm.
there now. We're eking out those last percentage points now, which means I think we're going to enter a very protracted, I think maybe even as long as a decade of building, of now building with LLMs. And so many enterprises are starting from scratch. I think the only caveat from that is quantum, whenever quantum comes in the picture, will change that. But we're just purely guessing when we say like when or when that won't happen. But it is kind of the elephant
Yeah.
in the room. My other prediction, and I'm pretty confident on this one because we're already seeing the signals, is that I think AI is AI approaches are going to become quite polarized in that you are going to have the people that are going to still build with cloud infrastructures, they're going to be consuming APIs, all this as a service. And I think you're going to have other people that are going back on prem. that are wanting to look at hardware solutions. We have some interest upon, you see entire nations in Europe, they're talking about national AI. They're wanting, full control. And I think so you have this camp that's, we'll just use the latest
Yeah,
open models. And there's the camp of, we're going to do continuous fine tuning. We're going to have our own models. And those are very, very, very different
yeah,
approaches. Like those are almost mutually exclusive, and I don't think it's no surprise that I think that may be why our users are mutually exclusive because we're kind of on
yeah,
that opposite side as too. We're on that
yeah.
for the people that want to do everything themselves. So I kind of think that I think we're going to continue to see that divide, and I think we're going to have just I don't think one is right and one is wrong. I think we just have people that are going to make that philosophical choice of how they want to approach it, and both are
Yeah.
going to go in their own directions.
I think 100%. I mean, and that's another case where to date, we've been more opinionated of let's lean on managed services. Like, I mean, we use Azure services. Like, it would be a pain in the butt to migrate to some open source database or vector database and stuff like that. I'm like, because they work, they scale. There's hundreds of people at Microsoft making this product good on their side. We just want to sit on top of something like Azure AI Search, and I think for better or for worse. I mean, I think there's limitations, there's cost, but it's also, I mean, our customers, like, we're just like a Twilio or a Stripe API. Like, we just want to give them an
Hmm.
API. Here's an API key, just like OpenAI. I mean, it's that's our model that we're leaning into, and there's going to be people who hate that. I mean, or don't want that. But I think then they would look at people like you, or I mean, there's other, I mean, folks out there that can give them that. But I think there's enough room for everybody, and I think for us, we're not trying to be everything to everybody because
Yeah,
it's, I mean, we've gotten a little bit of like, well, can you do like a private Azure deployment and those kind of things, and that we could do. But it's in terms of like, oh, can you just be fully on prem and I mean, wean off of every like managed
right.
service that we use? Like, it's just not going to happen. I mean, or somebody would have to pay us $1 million to do it.
Yeah, and I don't have an answer on what that kind of balance is. On I just know that they're both there. They're definitely
Yeah,
both there, and I think the kind of the on-prem do everything yourself crowd is lagging behind. But boy, I'm seeing I think that's the one that's gonna kind of, kind of come up in the that's the one that's gonna make itself known, I think, in
mhm.
2026.
Well, um, yeah, I
Because
mean,
I think just to put this I'll go.
no, 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 go for it, go for it.
Because I think,
There's a little gap.
just, it requires hardware, and hardware has a longer lead time, so I think for that reason alone, it's lagged behind.
And I mean, we've had people come to us and say, "This all looks great. Can you do it on prem, like in a sandbox thing?" And the conversation's pretty quick. Where we're like, "Nope," and they're like, "Okay." And so I just like suggest some other competitor in the space, and I'm like, "Go talk to them." I mean, because it's like there's nothing we can say after that.
It's gonna be an interesting year in 2026. So I don't think we have to even I don't even think do we even need to answer whether we think AGI is coming in 2026?
I mean, to me, I'm one of those like I don't know what the hell it is. I mean, it's like
Well,
it,
there's that.
yeah. And so I'm happy. I mean, I'm still amazed, honestly, at what 2025 was. Like, if you look at the coding agents side of this,
Yeah, yeah, that one,
I
yeah.
mean, I mean, how I code now at the end of 2025 is completely different than how I coded on January 1st,
That's true for us
2025.
too. That's true.
And
It's
I
true.
mean, that is probably the most surprising thing. And but also the speed that derives out of that as a senior developer to be like, holy crap. I mean, I mean, I could go on for a while, but I think that
Yeah.
is a you can't understate that. And I think for next year it's going to be, I mean, really where do we see this going into production? Where do we see this evolving? And I'm bullish for sure. Like I think, I mean, like we talked about it. I mean, we're still so early in this curve, and
Yes.
I believe it's more of an internet-like moment or a mobile-like moment where it starts to change what's possible. And I don't think we have any clue what is going to be capable over the next couple of years.
I think we're gonna be rethinking a lot of things, even, what does the UI look like? We have a
Yeah,
TypeScript library now that you could give something like Claude Code and say, build me a UI using the TrustGraph TypeScript library so that it automatically has all the hooks into
Yeah,
TrustGraph. And so
yeah,
you all of a sudden you deploy TrustGraph, you deploy whatever UI Claude Code built for you in the span of 10 minutes, and all of a sudden you got product. And then you just kind of start
yeah,
iterating on it. And I think that's going to, like you said, if you'd asked me this time last year about what our staffing projections were in terms of developers, that's radically different now.
yeah,
I still see um, sales, marketing, sales engineers, people that are hands on with the customer. Still, that isn't going away. But in terms of the volume of people we need actually hands on with the code, dramatically reduced. And again, this
yeah,
is going to have a lot of ripple effects through economies, enterprises, how buy versus build.
yeah.
It's going to impact all that. And I guess we'll have to do this time next year to figure out were we right or did AI put us all out of jobs?
Well, no, I mean, on the last note is like I look at my son who is in his 20s, I mean, early 20s, and like was kind of heading in a computer science or some kind of software direction, and was getting finished at his first 2 years of college, and like kind of got delayed by COVID a bit. But now I'm like, I don't think CS is the right path. I mean, honestly, like I mean, as somebody with like CS and CS undergrad and grad, like we got to think about like what are the applications of AI and what is going to be the burgeoning field because I mean a junior there's a million like it'll weed out over a while but like I think it's a terrible time to come in as a junior dev because I
Well,
mean
absolutely.
I mean every like
That's exactly who
maybe
Claude Code's replacing.
right I mean but then it's like okay well QA is I mean you still need I think like I would still like I mean I think it's you can
Does
until the
anybody
tools
want to do that
automate
job?
right or design. I mean, I don't know. There's just other things that we're going to have to think about, and so it's an interesting area. I mean, I don't know. If I were him, I'd go be a plumber because it's like at least that you'd make more money. But it's it's a funny. I mean, it's a real transitional time.
And people forget that these things can go away. I'm old enough to remember that engineers had drafters. You go in an engineering company, they had an entire room of it was almost one to one engineers to draftsmen. And the
Yeah,
engineers would do the design and they would take it to the draftsman would draw it and they'd work together. And when CAD software started getting good, they're like, well, why did I have the draftsman? I can just have the engineers learn how to use CAD. And that career field, which had been around for as long as there'd been engineering,
yeah,
is gone. It's
yeah.
gone. It's not coming back. So it can happen. And I don't know I don't know how what the ripple effects of this are going to be. We need to find a cheerier note to end on than that one, though. Give me something cheery
Yes.
quickly.
I mean, I think on the flip side of that, which I think is a great way to end,
Okay.
the potential for the number of applications, the quality of software. Like I mean, I personally been able to build product that only existed in my head. And I had a team of 10 when we first started this 5 years ago, product, design, front end dev, like I still did back end. And now I'm able to deliver a better product to what we built 3 years ago. And like
Mm,
in a tenth of the time frame. I mean, literally. And so I think it's going to start to push on the UX, the design. I think
mm.
we're hopefully there's going to be more time allotted to how easy is this to use. Like I can build this so quickly, and like I found like I've been iterating within this process of being like, okay, this looks bad. Like how do I give it a screenshot, fix this design, like that iterative loop. Like if I was going to start something new, I think there's some really interesting areas around agentic coding and agentic design from a holistic design sense of those check and balances, which I think are really interesting. And I think maybe there's an area of like custom LLMs or custom visual models just for software design.
Mm.
And that's where I would love to see. I think there's some really interesting areas that, I mean, we could just have some incredible software 80, 90% built by AI at the end of the year. And I mean, it's already happening now.
What you just said reminded me so much of something I've been thinking about recently too, and it's my experience from the music business, and that how tools to record and make music have evolved. That
Yeah.
you go back to even the 1990s, if you wanted to record music, you had to go into a professional studio with professional engineers that knew how to work the equipment.
Yep.
And as we got to DAWs, digital audio workstations, that started getting down where like maybe you could build a studio in your home to today now it's
Mhm.
not even a laptop. You can do this stuff on your phone.
Yep.
And no, now it's never been easier, and music sounds more amazing than ever before. I mean, if you listen to stuff like in Atmos, if you listen to like an old song in Atmos,
Mhm.
it really starts to kind of expose the limitations. And some things you just
Yep.
kind of go, "Oh, I thought I liked this song. This sounds pretty rough, actually.
Yeah, yeah,
Wow, I need to go back and listen to this a different way." Or like, "Oh, my memories. Oh, the nostalgia." But it also had a tremendous impact on the economies of music,
yeah,
in that once anybody could create it, you kinda have to start monetizing the ancillary aspects of it, and
yeah,
is that the future of software? If it's that easy to create software, and this is kinda what some people talk about with the outcome-based pricing, which, I conceptually, I go, "That sounds good." I just haven't seen it put into practice
yeah.
kinda at all yet. That's actually one
Mhm.
of, the one of the people from the law firm I was talking to the other day. He said that's something they're thinking about is how do they do outcome-based pricing for a
Mhm.
law firm, not doing billable hours. But the caveat was, we have to figure out how the automation works first before we can even get there.
Well, I think it's also it's easy to almost make this so cheap. I mean, we've been looking at our pricing model and things of like, I mean, if I mean tokens are so cheap, this I mean this and that so cheap. I mean, you want to have good margins, but also you need to have some value pricing in there as well. It's a opportunity cost of, oh, you don't have to build this yourself. And then you start to look at, well, how does AI affect that? What if they could go build it themselves? And so, like, I mean, then your pricing has to kind of take that into account too. So it's a really interesting time. I think, I mean, pulling that out of it of what it's capable of, but also how it changes the business model, I think is going to be interesting. And like bespoke software, I mean, people talk about, oh, I'll use Replit, whip up a little app or V0. Like, I haven't needed that for my own needs yet. I know other people have, and like, I'm going to build a grocery shopping app or something like that. Like, I'm not sure. Like, I haven't had that moment yet. Like, I'm totally bought into the AI coding as the
Mhm.
way of the future, where I'm talking to something that is like almost feels like a person telling it what to do, and it figures out how to do it. And I just haven't had that moment for like building software for myself yet, which I think I'll be really curious to see if that moment happens this year.
Well, it's Kirk, as always, it's been a pleasure. You've given me so much to think about, even giving me a different way to think about interoperability and reminding me of just how much has changed in 2025. There's, talking about how changing the way we code.
Yeah,
That's true. It's hard. And then just, it's been such a year that, wow, it's only been a year. It seems like forever ago, but no, things really have changed.
it's
And we'll have
true.
to get this time next year. We'll have it all figured out, and we'll be on to the next wave of what things are doing, right?
I'm looking forward to it. I think it'll be really interesting to see where this ends up because it's I mean it's the trajectory is interesting. I think I mean there's a lot happening that like you said the models. I mean, is there another step change that is going to happen? Like, or is it just going to be refinement and polish, which is still a good thing. I mean, like if you call Opus 4.1 to 4.5 polished, that's a damn good thing to happen. And so I think I think I'm really curious to see how this evolves. So appreciate the time. This is super fun.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kirk.
Okay, bye.